Hello and welcome to the Esty Show. Today we're doing fractional product management with Ben Erez. You might remember Ben from one of the most popular episodes we've done here on feature factories. That episode was so hot, it even caught the attention, not necessarily of the best kind, but of Marty Kagan and Lenny Rachitsky, the greats of product management. And now Ben is back to discuss what it's like to set up a career as a fractional product leader. Guys, some conversations that I have are good, and some are very good. This is one of those conversations that left me with goosebumps, and I was still thinking about it days later. Now, what is fractional product management? So the literal translation is a numerical value that's not a whole number. So in product management, fractional just means an employee that's not full-time. This is one of a few conversations that I'll air on this topic because I've been doing a deep dive, and I spoke with Akash Gupta on fractional product management. He wrote a post together with Jason Knight on it, and he gives a perspective that's more research-based. He speaks with over 30 fractional product leaders and gives his perspective. Ben gives the perspective of first person, what it's like setting that up, how he's tested his way to the kind of work that he likes doing, to the kind of pricing that works for him and his family. And he is so open and direct about the successes and the failures. I am sure that anyone who's interested in any sort of fractional work will walk away with a playbook of tips. Now, we recorded this conversation a month ago, and Ben was going to offer a special discount for my listeners to his meta interviewing course. But fortunately for him and unfortunately for you, his course already sold out. So you'll hear the story of how he got started in that part of his business. And if you're interested, maybe sign up for a future course of his. Who's this episode for? This episode is for product managers and leaders who want to know what it's like going out on your own. For product managers who are burnt out. For product managers who want to live lives on their own terms. If you enjoy this conversation with Ben, you should check out his own podcast with Mark Basegla. It's called Supra Insider. I want to give you a preview into upcoming conversations for the next couple of weeks so you can get excited. One of them is with Allison Yamamoto on how to do reference calls to get the really valuable information. And one is with Akash Gupta talking about fractional product leadership from his perspective. Both conversations were deep, interesting, and I cannot wait to bring them to you. Sometimes I forget to say this, but it does make a difference. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend, leave a review and a rating, preferably 5 stars. I also have a newsletter that you should definitely sign up for. It's completely free. Just go to thestshow.com. And without further ado, let's get into the discussion with Ben Erez on how he became a fractional product leader. Traditionally, we've seen people use fractional work as an in-between, and now we're seeing more and more people use it as a state of being. I'm not necessarily looking for my next role, but I'm able to maintain a lifestyle I want with some fractional work, and I'd rather stay in this state than look for my next full-time role right now. So number one, I'd love to get your personal background. You're a product manager par excellence, how you got to the decision you got to now and what your experience has been like.
Yeah, I never really heard the term fractional until probably when I first met Nolan, who's the founder CEO at Continuum, which was my last full-time job. And when I started talking to him about what he's building and what Continuum was building at the time was a marketplace for fractional executives. So people that are directors or more senior from tech companies across a bunch of different disciplines like marketing, sales, engineering, product, etc. These people would join Continuum, and then they would get matched with companies that are looking for someone in the fractional spectrum. So I had to learn, what does fractional mean? And I learned there's a bunch of different definitions that people have for fractional, but the way that we used it was kind of, we put the world into really 2 buckets. There's the full-time work, and then there's the fractional work. And then the fractional work had kind of like a spectrum, all the way from super low, kind of like low time commitment engagements, like a advisory, maybe an hour a week or a few hours a month kind of situation, all the way through part-time work, which is maybe like 10, 15 hours a week of boots on the ground, rolling your sleeves up and getting work done, all the way into maybe like full-blown 40, 50 hours a week for a certain number of months as kind of like an interim leader until they found the next person. And so I ended up meeting a bunch of these executives doing user research and just trying to figure out how we could better serve them and solve their problems. And that was, I think, a really educational moment for me in my career, like being in a full-time job, but also meeting a bunch of people that are either in a full-time job doing fractional work on the side or have taken that leap that you're describing. And some of those people were just starting. They maybe just left, 20 years in a really big tech company, and they've never done advisory before. So they're super fresh and green and trying to just figure out what's what, all the way to the people that were maybe a few years in and they just wanted to be on the platform because they thought that was the right place to list themselves. They wanted to be in good company. And by the time I left Continuum, I learned enough about how people were doing this kind of work that I wanted to put myself to the test and do it myself. So I've been doing this for about 5 months now, doing advising. And I think what you find is that fractional it's kind of like literally everything that's not full-time work. So I've been doing like PM interview coaching. I've been doing advisory for early stage startups. I have an interim engagement that I'm doing right now as a kind of like a first PM lead for a pre-seed company. And I'm going to probably help them find the full-time person in the second half of this year. And then I did go through a period where I actually had 2 part-time PM roles for a couple months. And I found that to not work well for me. And I'm happy to talk about why that is. But the last thing I'll say is that at its best, I think there's a lot of people that are skeptical about things like interim product leaders. And I just want to highlight a story from back in 2014. I was the 35th employee at a company called Life360 that actually just IPO'd this week in the US.
Congratulations.
And I did not profit from that because I was too young and junior to have any meaningful equity, unfortunately. But I'm still like rooting for the guys and they're great. And I'm happy for all of them for sure. But we at the time had our CEO that was pretty much running product. And that CEO decided that he needed a product leader. And we grew to 50 people, 60 people. And then ultimately, when we hit about 75, 80 people, we brought this guy named Gibson Biddle in to be our interim chief product officer is kind of, I think, what we called it. And he was showing up 3 days a week. He came off of 3 years at Chegg, having a successful IPO, 4 years at Netflix, or I think it was 4 years, but pretty much spearheaded product at Netflix as they went from DVDs to streaming. Gib did not need to work anymore. He was choosing to work, and he was entering this next phase of his life where he wanted to start doing more workshops and giving talks. So Gib, the kind of deal that seemed like they struck was that Gib was going to do the job for 3 days a week. And in return, he did talks once a week and kind of used us as guinea pigs for giving all of his new presentations and to get feedback. And so I just learned a ton from Gib, not just watching him do that job and seeing how effective someone could be 3 days a week in that kind of role when they're that senior and that seasoned, but also the impact it can have on the culture and the morale of the team to have someone like that just around and to be able to like learn from them, even if it's not about the specific work you're doing, but just about in general, picking their brain and learning, that it has massive benefits. So I think that people that are skeptical about fractional work, I think maybe just haven't seen it in its best form. So it's not for everyone, but I certainly think there's many environments where it can be really helpful.
So in that example, you were a product manager. There was just a lack of product leadership. The CEO was doing it himself, and then he wanted to bring in someone else to do it.
I was technically a project manager at Life360. We had, I think, when Gib joined, 2 PMs, and I think he ended up hiring the full-time replacement for himself. He left after about a year, but he did that for about 3 days a week for a year.
Let's start with the Tachlis side, the finances. So if someone is in a full-time job, anywhere from senior to head of product role in a small to mid-sized company, is fractional work something realistically they can sustain themselves with? The 40 to 50 hour model that you presented, is that realistic, or is that sometimes you can rely on it, or you can realistically build up a book of clients and sustain it to that point where you can really choose a lifestyle that's full-time or part-time consulting?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the highest paid fractional executives on the Continuum platform, I mean, we placed an interim C-level person that it was an interim engagement. They were working really hard, but I think their contract was something like $55K a month. So that was a massive, they can certainly sustain their life with those kind of contracts and take multiple months off a year if they choose to. Also, these people tend to come from Like they've been saving for a while. So there's less of like a I need to make ends meet kind of mentality with people doing this kind of work. There's more like a I've earned the right to kind of do what I want for a while, and this is the way I want to work. We also had people doing advisory engagements that were charging $1,000 an hour. So if you can do 10 hours a month of advisory calls, you're bringing in 10K. And I think for a lot of people who've been saving for a while, that's enough to cover most of their like basic expenses. I do think that you could pay your bills these ways. And then again, going back to my point earlier, is my approach into fractional is to not put all my eggs in any single basket. So I have advisory engagements, I have an interim engagement, and then I have my course I just launched at Maven for PM coaching. And I also do one-on-one coaching for PMs that are interviewing at places like Meta. So I'm not concentrated in any single one thing. And I don't want to be either. That's kind of one of the things that's bringing me energy in this phase right now, is being able to have multiple avenues for not just generating income, but also just they're different kinds of work that I feel like I enjoy for different reasons.
Let's go through the different types of work that you described. Okay, so the first, advisory. You come in as an outside expert. And to be the devil's advocate here, I love teachers. I come from a family of teachers. But the saying of if you can't do it, teach. How do you describe that role? And how does someone in that role find themselves effective in delivering actual value? What kind of company does it need to be? What kind of structure do they have in place? And how does value delivered versus you just wasted our money come into play?
Yeah, the way I describe the advisorships that are set up for success are when you have people that are on the ground, in the seat, able to do the work, and they just need help figuring out where to spend their time and their energy. Maybe they think that they're doing it the right way, but there's a doubt. They're like, could I be doing it better? I've never done this before. I'm a new territory. Like, for example, I'm about to kick off an advisory engagement with a company for a few hours a month, and it's a seed stage company, and they have a person who's by background a marketing person who has been tasked with running product. And I don't think they need a full-time product person right now. And they had a product person that is leaving to start their own company as part of their extended founding team. So now there's a gap. And this marketing person is extremely sharp. She's super smart, very capable, and she's been around a lot of product development processes in her career. But this is her first time running product, and she's working really closely with the CEO, and they have a great dynamic, both awesome women. And the CEO's background is, I think, more in like the domain that they're building in. So she's also and she's got all the CEO stuff to do, getting this company off the ground. They've got an engineering team overseas. They've got a couple fractional designers, and they have a big launch coming up at the end of the year. And they just need to make sure that everything's going to like be TikTok ready to go from a user experience perspective when they get there. And they're worried about getting it right. So the value that I'm going to be bringing is I'm going to be that sounding board for that marketing person who's running product and helping her make all of the decisions. And if the takeaway from our sessions is, hey, like, I actually think you're doing all the right things, you're talking to all the right people, doesn't seem to be like a lot of room for improvement here, I would just say, like, keep doing what you're doing and let's talk like next week and see like if there's another issue I can help with. If that's the outcome, I think that's actually going to be pretty valuable, because it's kind of like having someone like sanity check that you're doing all the basic things right. But if there's something that seems like a low-hanging fruit or something really obvious that I'm seeing that maybe she can't see because she doesn't have that experience, then I can be there to point those things out and at least make her aware of them. And if upon being aware of them, she wants to like pick my brain on what I would do specifically and take action, I'm there to give that advice. But that's the key difference for me between an advisor and someone who's maybe more like a fractional leader in the seat. The fractional leader in the seat actually is expected to do that work too.
There was one company I was at that actually hired essentially what you're describing now, an advisor, and we would meet once a month. Amar Kendall, he was so helpful. I brought in a prioritization framework and I talked him through it, and he just gave me like 2-3 pointers that improved it so much. We were talking about initiatives, which initiatives to focus on. I just felt like that 1 hour a week, and he was also accessible in between that time, the month. I just felt it helped me directionally a lot. The blocks in the business were a bit too strong, even with his power combined, but that was a huge help for me. I felt like the company was also investing in me. The other benefit that I felt, and tell me if you have this engagement as well, is if I wanted to get a message through to the CEO, or, I think something's important, me pushing it alone is not the same as having this expert externally saying, hey, I've looked at the data. I spoke to this person. I also spoke to the CTO. I've seen.
It's probably true. Yeah, that's probably true. Although they seem super aligned. The two of them have been working together. This marketing person is also fractional, by the way. So she's like a fractional CMO, and she's kind of spearheading product. But they've been working together for over a year now. And we had the kickoff call, all three of us together, like the CEO and the marketing person and me. And So I don't anticipate there being kind of like things that they're at odds about that my input's going to like be the tiebreaker. But I do think that their existing conversations will probably become a little bit more informed or a little bit higher level if my perspective ends up being useful. Like they can be like, oh, and Ben said this.
Also, like as someone who's not embedded in the company, you're coming with more, I feel like, industry expertise. Like I've seen, and the more these types of clients you pick up, you say, I've seen 3 companies do this and it's been successful. Or I've seen company after company try this and not be successful. So you're bringing that to the table as well.
Yeah, at the end of the day, like when you really think from first principles, like why is experience helpful?
Yeah.
Right? Why does someone that has, 15 years of experience doing something, why are they more valuable to a company than someone who's got 2 years of experience doing that thing, right? And, there's probably not a definitive answer, but in my view, I think a large part of it is that they have seen patterns. They've seen things that emerge. They can recognize the current situation and figure out which kind of framework might apply to it or which lessons from the past could be applied to the current moment. Like they can help you see around corners. So I think that's kind of the goal. And yeah, like I'm definitely not an industry, like a domain expert in what they're building. Like they know the space that they're building in way better than I do. But when it comes to like, hey, you've got this deadline, you've got these engineers over here who can do this stuff, and you've got these designers over here who can do this stuff, and then here are the people you're trying to serve, and then here's the biggest gap between like what you can do today and what you need to do to serve those people, and these are all the resources you have. So like, how do you literally decide what to invest in, and how do you make sure you execute really well against that? I'm just leaning into kind of a superpower of mine, which is execution, and trying to help like that. That's one of the areas that, I have a lot of areas of weakness for sure, and areas that I have gaps. But like I would say that consistently throughout my career, like execution rigor has been one of my strengths.
We'll get into this in the third category that you brought up. But if execution is your strength, as an advisor, you're really not tapping into that execution piece. You're not executing anything yourself. You're just working with the people who are executing.
However, yes, but
okay,
or yes, and I don't know about you, but when I'm around people who are better than I am at something and they're telling me how they are seeing the situation, I can't unsee it. So if I can see a way to execute better relative to the way they're executing and I express it, I'm pretty much like I'm showing them a gap, right? And if they choose to not act on that, that's their call. But there's no lack of motivation and capability and competence in this team. Like the reason I want to work with them is because I feel like if I give them good advice, they will do stuff with it. Also, they reached out to me. So like if someone comes to you and is like, hey, we really think we would benefit from your advice, and then you give them advice and they don't take action on it, you could like be like, hey, maybe I don't have the value to offer you that you thought I did. And that's totally cool. And like, let's find you someone better, right? But if they think I can be helpful and then I plug in and I think I can be helpful and then I give advice and they find the advice actionable and relevant and then they take action on it and good things happen, then that seems like it's like a win for everybody.
It's like the grandparent relationship. You have all the benefits without the responsibilities.
Yeah, sure. I would say advisors don't have accountability the way that the people in the seat do, which is, in my opinion, actually one of the downsides of advising is because I like that accountability. So I like having to think through things when my neck is on the line. However, what I've learned about myself over the years is sometimes when I am not connected to the company in a deep way, like I'm the product leader and it's my decision and I'm responsible for whether it goes wrong or right. And sometimes when I have that distance, I've been told I give really good feedback.
Interesting.
I give really good advice. And I think when I can look objectively at someone else's situation, dots connect that sometimes maybe don't connect for me when I'm in the seat.
Your judgment is not as cloudy.
Yeah. You're honestly like less worried about maybe your ego. Maybe it's my ego doesn't get in the way. Maybe it's what does this mean for me?
Right. Let's reframe ego as sense of self-worth. Like, I'm a failure if this doesn't work.
Yeah, well, or if maybe the right decision for this marketing person is, hey, like they have an assumption they need a full-time PM. And what if I come in and what if my advice ends up like setting her up for success and then they don't need a PM? But let's say I was the PM at this company and I came to that conclusion.
Right. Then
now I have to justify yourself. My own existence.
Yeah.
At this company, right? But as an advisor, I'm like, I can look at it objectively. Like, you don't need a PM here. You guys are great. Like, you're crushing. Save the money.
Right.
And A PM's only going to hurt you. There's just one more person you got to convince. It's another chef in the kitchen or another cook in the kitchen. Just like keep going the way you're doing it, and like why mess it up, right? But if you're in the seat doing the job and you come to that conclusion, you honestly can't talk about it the same way.
Yeah. Let's jump to the second category, which is interim, chief marketing officer. And there are two types of interims, right? They're hiring someone, but someone can only start 3 months from now. So they're hiring someone for the gap, or they haven't hired someone. They want to hire someone and they want it to have the time and the space to make a thoughtful decision. So they hire an interim person who could turn into the full-time person, or maybe not, depending on how it goes.
I'd say there's a third.
Yeah, tell me.
That's like the maternity or paternity leave scenario, which we saw a lot at Continuum. So like someone's going to take 4 or 5 months off to, bond with their new baby. So the company has to decide, like, are we cool living with this gap? Should one of that person's direct reports maybe step into the role and kind of like oversee their responsibilities, or does their boss oversee their responsibilities, or is this enough of a job that we don't have the right people and it's not for the CEO or whoever they report to do that job? So we actually need someone in the seat. And they start looking months leading up to the maternity or paternity leave to fill those gaps. But I'd say those 3 scenarios probably cover 95% of what I've seen.
And have you ever been in those shoes? Like, who's a good candidate to step into that? Because the idea that the good full-time people are employed. So you gave one example of the person who retired. Like, he made it. He did his Netflix gig. Like, he doesn't really need it. Sort of people who still want to be somewhat involved but have some free time. Are there other categories of people who would fit well into that role?
Yeah, so I'm doing one right now until the middle of July. And I came into this, I came into this one through a mutual friend introduced me to the founder. And they had a product person on their initial kind of like founding team who ended up not being a good fit anymore. So they parted ways. And they brought me in initially to do kind of like a knowledge transfer from that person so that, whatever was happening in his head could still be available to the rest of the team. And it was a 5-week contract. And upon coming in and starting to do my knowledge transfer work, which is like really talking to people and asking a ton of questions and documenting stuff, I discovered that it's not a knowledge transfer that was needed. It was an actual, like, there's a bunch of questions that just didn't have answers. Like, there's a lot of open questions that people route me to this document, and that document is like 6 months out of date, and this other thing. And
are
so
these process things, or is this like we don't have an answer to why customers do this, or why there's a gap in this in the business?
It's like what's our like plan? Like, what are we actually working on right now? Like, what's the next milestone? What's the scope of that milestone? How does that scope relate to the next milestone after that? When are we going to talk to users? How are we going to talk to users and validate these things? There were not good questions. Like, the level of clarity that existed internally was extremely low. So I could have just done the job of, hey, like, I'll just document this and give it to the CEO. But I told them about a week in, I was like, I don't know if a knowledge transfer is actually what you need. I think what you actually need is help answering these questions. Like, and I can help with that because that's actually what the business needs. And he agreed. So we kind of used the first 5-week contract. We pivoted a week in and went from knowledge transfer to like, okay, help us get some answers. And then I was doing that while I was doing another engagement. This was one of the 2 engagements I was balancing with another one. And the other one was about 10, 15 hours a week of me also PMing a project at another company. So I came in with my designer friend and we kind of tackled this as a PM and designer together at this company. That no need to go into that. But anyways, I was balancing 2 different projects at once and 2 different companies, 2 different teams, 2 different cultures, 2 different everything, right?
The context switching?
I found the context switching to be too expensive and heavy for me. I underestimated how just like not fun that would make things.
Going back just to because I want to get into the 2 part-time jobs, but into the interim role.
Yeah.
You mentioned something.
That turned into a 3-month, and that just to finish that turned into a 3-month kind of like extension on top of that, which is going to take me to the middle of July.
And then what happens in July? They hire someone else? Do you already know you're not interested in continuing with the company past July?
I'll be talking to the CEO about that, I think, next week. And I think I'm going to be in France for all of August visiting my wife's family with our daughter and just taking the month off, which is one of the benefits of fractional life, right? People ask, why do people do this? That's one of the reasons. I get, like, last year I went to France while I had a job, and that sucked. Like, I had to spend full days doing like childcare and trying to enjoy myself all day, put my daughter to bed and then have dinner and then work like 6 hours. And that drained a lot of my life energy from me. So my goal this year was I would like to not work when we go to France, or to work on things only that I find interesting for like a few hours that month. So that's one of the benefits. And so I'm pretty much the conversation with that founder is what happens in September. And I think there's a few options. One option is we can keep doing something similar to what we're doing without, I like the flexibility of kind of having these end dates because, again, like I said, it allows me to be more objective. I'm not committed to something that doesn't need to exist, right? The second option is that I can shift back into more of an advisory role, and maybe they don't backfill, so they don't need a PM because I've done a good job to get them the clarity they need. But the third option could be that I advise and help them find that full-time PM if they do think they still need a full-time PM. And then the fourth option is just part ways, right? I brought a lot of value to the table. They're happy. I'm happy. It's been great. I have a few new clients lined up. They've got their own plans. And the beauty is that it can just organically go in any of these directions, and literally none of them are better or worse than the others. They're just what they should be.
One thing you brought up is that originally you were brought in for a knowledge transfer. It was like, I could just think of the CEO saying, like, we come in, we do this project, it needs to happen, and we're done. But like, as you were talking, realistically, most CEOs are ADHD, and if they're not, just the roles make them ADHD because they have a million things to take care of on the outside with the fundraising and on the inside with the projects of the company. So realistically, there was no way he would actually, or she would be reading the document you put together, the knowledge transfer.
They probably would. The CEO is very hands-on. I think it's a he. He did care a lot about the results of what I found. And he did have very clear deliverables that we aligned on when we kind of like finalized the engagement before everything got signed. So I didn't have any doubts that he would pay attention.
But you did see an opportunity once you did that to say, like, I've done the knowledge transfer, but here's the problem with just leaving it at that and leaving you here. We should build some sort of bridge.
Yeah, well, if you're tasked with a knowledge transfer and then your assessment is, wow, this is all like excellent information. I've documented it now and everyone can access it. Awesome. Like, what's next? If that's one path it could have gone. But if you're using your brain and you're talking to people and you're asking all your questions and you're a curious person and you just come to a moment where you're like, wait, hold on, we don't know the answer to this. This feels kind of like I was assuming we knew. Does someone else know? And then you're like, I don't think so. And then here's the document someone wrote about it. And you read the document and you're like, this doesn't make sense to me. Like, I don't understand what this means, right? So if you kind of hit a point where you cannot understand the content and it's not like there's like huge gaps in your own ability to weave together what's happening, you can either fill in the gaps and just like quote unquote hallucinate it, right? Like one of these ChatGPT models, or you can point out the gaps to the person who hired you and say, hey, like these are gaps.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable with these gaps? Do you want me to proceed with documenting them and just leave this big gap in the documentation of what I'm doing for you? Or would you actually like me to bring some of my skills to the table here and like help you fill these gaps? Yeah.
I remember one CEO telling me he fired a PM because he couldn't understand a single ticket that he wrote. And he was like, if I can't understand it, how would the engineers understand it?
It's just like sometimes you look at stuff that PMs work on. And again, like I'm not gonna badmouth PMs in general, but I do think that there's like different levels of PMs. And like some of my favorite PMs are just like really clear in their communication, and you don't have to read what they say twice. And it's just like, it just hits you immediately. Like the first time you read it, you're like, okay, I get it. And then I don't want to anchor too much on the documentation I read, but like it was complex. And it was like, I really had to like read it like many times to try to make sense of it. And it was almost like the complexity, even if there were great ideas in there and like the person who wrote them had a perfect idea in their head of what they were trying to say, I was like, I'm not clear on what this means. So maybe I'm the wrong guy. But like if I can't understand it as someone who's objective, and I like to think I'm very comfortable with like reading and writing and verbal communication, if I don't understand what it means, there's no way that me just documenting that and telling everyone else about it's going to make sense magically.
And you verified. Right? You asked other people in the company, do you have an answer?
I mean, it's literally like, if you think, going back to what I said earlier, when execution's a superpower of mine. So when I'm thinking like, okay, how does this company go from where it is right now to where it needs to be? And I understood the milestones by talking to the CEO before he finalized the engagement. And I realized like, oh, the designer doesn't know what they're supposed to design.
And that was in our last episode. You said feature factory is what gets undervalued is the product management work that's still required. And you said sometimes there's one line that comes down and says, build this, and it can mean
in this case, it's not one line. It's more of like a long-term vision that needs to be translated to like near term, like what are we building? And then the engineers are asking, what are we building? And then the designer is like, I don't know. So it's like the process was just broken.
I had one
right?
situation where, when sometimes, funny, we're on a podcast, but someone hears a podcast or reads an article or sees a top company does something and like, oh, we'll do that. So a leader in this company saw that Amazon puts out press releases about a future vision of the company. So that leader wrote a press release of a state of a product when it was launched. And this was pre-discovery, pre-validation, pre-anything. And then like anyone would try to do like any discovery, any scoping. And it was like, no, we have the press release. Like that's your documentation.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, okay, there's an internal conflict, and let me know if you want to speak to it. But as someone who's providing advising services and you get paid if you can extend the services, you're incentivized to look for opportunities where you could provide additional value, which you could say is also an
That's probably true.
Of incentives between you and the business. Could it come
I would say, I think it's true that there is, and I heard this from a lot of the execs that we worked with at Continuum, that when people come into an engagement that starts like an advisory engagement, if they would like it to grow into a bigger engagement so that they can make more money off of it, then they are certainly going to be more on the lookout for opportunities to expand. I think that's true. Okay. What I've also seen is people come in, they see stuff, they make their own assessment, and they're like, they need way more help than I can offer. Like I got to tap out. Like they need, 30 hours of my time, and we have like a 5 hours a week kind of agreement. I don't want that work. Right. So like, while there's like if you just boil it down to sheer dollars, like I would agree that there's an incentive to expand. But if like the work itself is not interesting, I wouldn't have wanted to make the expansion. But I think I get excited when I see, okay, lots of passion in the founder, super strong designer, super strong engineers, clear problem that I think they're trying to solve. There's a product that is doing something, it's not doing it great, and they need to make it better. And they just need clarity. And I thrive in those kind of like situations that are, maybe they're like a turn off to some people, but I just get excited when I see the chance to actually like get that stuff working.
Remove the ambiguity, put a clear path forward.
Exactly.
Next category of role. So actually part-time PM work. You're not a leader, you're not an advisor. There's actually something that needs to get built. We don't have a budget, I'm assuming, right? Why would someone hire a part-time PM? But you're essentially a part-time PM. Please sit down. Here's a designer. Here's an engineering team. Get this to the finish line.
Yeah, this was the other client that I was juggling. So that founder is doing something interesting. I don't know if it's smart. I think time will tell. But he is the only full-time person at his company, and he's built a team of fractional people. So pretty much everyone is fractional. So he's got, I think, 2 or 3 fractional PMs that are all like 20 to 30 hour a week PMs. There's no, head of product. He's got 20 to 30 hour a week engineers. He's got 20 to 30 hour a week designers. Same with, he's got a marketing agency. He's pretty much like assembled this like fractional army, this little fractional army that's building this company. And he's raised like, millions of dollars of seed funding. He's got a good relationship with his investor, and he's got competitors. He's got clarity on what he wants to do differently. So there's it's a company for sure, and they pay reasonably well.
As I hear you, like what's going through the back of my mind is lack of ownership.
Complete lack of, that's probably true. And I think that he wanted more of my time, and this other company wanted more of my time. And I made the decision to spend more of my time with this company because I felt like everyone else was full-time. So if I were to kind of like settle in a bigger capacity, I would kind of know who does what and who's accountable for what and who's responsible for what. It'd be more familiar. Like I would be the wild card, not everyone else. And I think in that first company, it's like everyone's kind of a wild card and everyone's on different time zones. And because everyone's fractional, can't rely on their calendars to like actually represent like when they're available. So if you want to meet with them, you don't know when, and when you can. It's just like the communication overhead of those environments really challenging. And then because of that, I think there's also this desire to over document things. So, if the state of the maturity of the documentation in that environment was like ridiculously high, like it was way too much documentation. I'm like, there's a huge mismatch here between like the stage of the company. This is like a pre-product market fit company. This is like a barely product stage company. And then the documentation looks like I'm working at like, a 500 person company. So it just felt like you get to learn so much about how different companies work when you do this for these fractional engagements. And in that case, my assessment was I don't think I could be effective being a part-time PM in both these companies. I'd much rather commit to a finite engagement where I'm kind of like more 30 hours a week or so. And then I still get to do a podcast on the side. I still get to do other stuff, coaching, but that's how I'm staying fresh and not becoming stale as a PM.
Fascinating. And when you're talking about context switching, what's going through my mind is if you're working at one company and you have a project that you're, supposed to launch or work on, and requests keep on coming in, and this request is really urgent. Can you move it into this sprint? And it's just 2 points, or it's just this. No one's talking about the context switching expense of like stopping to work on the core project or what you're working on, to switch and then switch back.
It's very high. I mean, I would open up my laptop and I'd have unread Slacks from both organizations, and I would have to go into one and figure out which ones I was going to answer and do all the same triage again in the other one. And then it's hard. Like, we're like tribal animals at the end of the day. Like we really can only have, I believe we can really only have one tribe at a time, like a primary tribe, at least, or at least that's how my brain's wired. So for me, what it felt like is I had two tribes and I was struggling to keep the story. My brain was processing all the time. Like usually like I can disconnect a little bit at the end of the day and just kind of go to sleep and just feel like I know exactly what I'm going to do tomorrow. And when I was running 2 engagements, I felt like I would go to sleep at night and my brain would still be racing because I'm like, I'm definitely missing something. Like something's not clear because I'm only spending half my time with each of these companies. And therefore, I don't have the ability to get the full picture in either of them. And that makes me stressed. Like that just like, I felt myself getting more stressed from the work that way.
You ultimately chose the tribe where you saw a path to belonging.
I think I saw a path to more predictability and less ambiguity. Still tons of ambiguity, but the kind of like desirable ambiguity, not the meta ambiguity around like, is this even my call, right? Like whose decision is this? Like those kind of ambiguities can like really burn you out. If it's once a week or whatever, there's like a decision that needs to be made, you're not sure, it's fine. But like if almost like every decision, like every time someone asks a question, you're like, I don't even know if that's my call, right? That's the stuff that burns you out because as a PM, you're going to deal with like hundreds of those every week. So the other one, it was the one I'm doing the interim engagement with has very clear decision. Like there's a founder CEO and there's a team and like I know who's responsible for what. So I think it's more predictable.
There's going back to that ambiguous environment and lack of ownership or everyone being fractional. There's this meme, if the code ain't broke, don't fix it. And the picture is a ceiling fan, but the light switch is in the fan. So you have to like use a stick to push it. But like the idea is if it functions on the front end, we got it to work. Not my problem. I finished my hours. I'm out. That kind of philosophy or attitude where someone's just a fractional person and they put in their 3 hours and they're out and they just have to get something to work. They're thinking about how do we get it to work rather than what's the best way to build this. I think
some of the people at that company operate that way. I think it's actually probably a better environment for those people because that's what they want. And then I think there's another kind of person that is in that company that wants to do things, quote unquote, the right way, or make sure that the pieces are all going to fit together in a way that makes sense holistically. And they think more like owners, right? Like they're like, if this was my company, would I be cool with things proceeding the way they're proceeding? And I have a very strong owner's mindset. Like I always try to put myself in the shoes of the founder CEO or the investors of the company. And if I see something that goes against, like if it would bother me as the owner, like I feel a need to do something about it.
Right.
And so that environment can be very challenging for people that have that owner's mindset because it's going to burn you out. Like inherently, it's going to burn you out to try to get things all working that way. Even if you were full-time in that environment, you'd burn out because it's the system. We talked about this a little bit last time, but like the systems that you operate in, they dictate everything about how you feel about being in that system. And like, I think if there's a match between someone and the kind of environment they thrive in and the actual environment in a company, that's where magic happens. But if there's a mismatch between the kind of environment that you thrive in and the company that you're plugged into, then it's kind of hard to reconcile. You're going to have to change, which you're not, and you shouldn't have to. And then they're going to have to change, which they might, but it's going to be an uphill battle and take a long time to get there. So I think life is too short, in my view, to spend your time in these environments that are like a bad fit, which is going all the way back to like, why I'm enjoying this phase right now and why I'm doing what I'm doing is because like I've learned that I'm a catalyst and I'm an accelerant for clarity and like getting things moving in the right direction. And if I do that well, sometimes that takes 2 months, right? And if that takes 2 months and I had a really positive impact and they were really happy with what happened and I felt engaged and excited, and then I can just tap out and do that again for another team. If I can work with 5 or 6 different startups a year and help them, leave them in much better shape than I found them, that feels like it's, if you look at the sum of that year, that was a year spent in flow state, feeling very engaged, very, very motivated, very constant sense of contribution, not getting bored, making an impact every day, right? Like that's kind of how you'd sum up that year, even though it wasn't with one company.
Let's just talk about the last category, and it's going to fit in well, which is PM and interview coaching, where you're essentially people who are trying to get into Meta, which has a very structured interview process where, as Alex said, you either do the dance or you don't. You're helping people there, and tell me if you have a package or how you select your clients, but how much of your time is that and how much of your satisfaction, personal satisfaction, comes out of that?
Yeah, this is a very different category of how I spend my time. It started when I was at Meta. And when I was at Meta, I had people pinging me wanting to get referred in, and I would refer them if I thought they'd be a good fit. And when they had interviews scheduled, they'd be like, hey, can we do some mocks or give me some tips? And I'd give them tips. And I never even thought about asking for money. And actually, while working at Meta, I think it's against the rules of working at Meta to make money by coaching people. They say you could help people, but it's kind of frowned upon in general. It's definitely against the rules. Like I think you can get fired for it if for like making money off of coaching people on the interviews while you're there.
But if you get a referral in, then you get financial compensation from Meta for it, no?
Yes, there is a referral bonus, or at least there was at the time. But they're not supposed to help those people get the job, right?
Okay.
So anyway, I did this stuff very informally. I didn't have any framework for it. I was just telling them, hey, look, here's what I did to prepare for the job. And then now that I got coached up and I'm interviewing people, I've done a couple interviews. Here's like the things I see people doing well. And here's the mistakes people do. And then fast forward the clock, I was at Meta for a little under 2 years and I did over 40, interviews with people. And I even trained up other people to do the interviews at Meta because that's part of your org contribution and your performance review at a place like that. And I ended up leaving and I joined Attentive. And as part of Attentive's interview process, they also had a product sense interview and an execution interview. And the feedback I got from my recruiting partner there was that I crushed both of those interviews and I got the lead PM job. And I was like, okay, interesting. So apparently the way Meta does stuff is not just the way Meta does stuff, but apparently a lot of other companies have followed the same kind of like rubric. And if there's a playbook that I used that worked at Meta, maybe it also works at these other places. So after I left Meta, I actually started coaching people still on the Meta interviews. And then at some point, was it almost a year ago at this point, if you remember, Meta did a bunch of layoffs. And
hard to forget.
Yeah, and there were people that were still there that were kind of being forced to either convert to a PM, like a product manager, or leave the company. So there was these people that kind of, so in this example, was a product marketing person that reached out to me. They were a director of product marketing. And this director of product marketing had an interesting opportunity. They're like, hey, you can convert to being a director of product management, or you could leave. And if you want to convert, you have to pass the loop, the PM loop. So he reached out to me because we worked together when I was there. And he was like, hey, like, would you be willing to help me prepare for these interviews? And I was like, sure. And we ended up spending, I don't know, like 5 or 6 hours together over the next few weeks. And I just gave him a bunch of tips and he ended up getting the job. And he's a director of product management now at Facebook. And he said he's convinced that he wouldn't have passed without my help. So after I joined, he's like, can I thank you?
Yeah.
So he's like, how can I thank you for this? And I was like, if you want to plug me to other people that might be in a similar boat, like do it. So he ended up referring me to probably like 6 or 7 different people that were on his product marketing team that were trying to pass the PM loop. And I started by charging, like $100 a session. And then I found that I could raise it to $150, $200, $250, $300. People still paid and people were still happy with the value they were getting. And I was like, so I was getting more reps and I was doing it with more people and I was making good side cash doing this. And I knew these people had the cash because they'd been at Meta for like 5 or 6 years. And like they were extremely motivated to get these jobs. So they were like super grateful for the help and they didn't even care about paying me for it. So I was like, okay, this is interesting. I could make money doing this. And the people that are paying me are really happy to be paying me that money because they feel like I'm doing them like almost like a favor. Like they really appreciate it. So what I did is I ended up taking all the tips that I learned from both preparing for myself and coaching all these people. And there's a lot of like heuristics I started repeating over and over again, and people's like eyes light up. They're like, oh wow, like no one's ever explained it to me like that before. So I took all that stuff and I packaged it into a course that's now live on Maven. And my goal with that is to try to take a lot of what I've been doing one-on-one with people and to try to make it more accessible to people in a kind of cohort-based setting. We'll see how it goes. It's an experiment, but I think that the value from the course is going to be really high for the people that are actually trying to prepare. And if they're like me, struggled to come up with like a framework and had to piece it together for myself, hopefully I could save them some time. So yeah, that's the PM interview coaching stuff. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I'm interested to see how it scales from working one-on-one with areas where people need specific help to just having people watch your video and seeing if they come out with the same results or even similar.
Well, I think the value of the one-on-ones is really in the mocks, like the practice. So if I ask you a question right now and you're under the gun to like literally walk through it live, and I'll be the interviewer and you're the interviewee, and that's the one-on-one magic where like you're getting that personal white glove treatment where I'm going to like, it's a simulation and you can't do that simulation as a group, but all the stuff that comes before that simulation is what's in the course. So in other words, if we did a mock right now and I give you feedback, the feedback, how would you plug that feedback into your framework? You have we haven't even aligned on what the framework is, right? So what I do with people is I spend the first hour with them helping them understand the framework for how to give the interviewer every signal they need within the 45 minutes of the interview by following a very specific playbook. I literally have it written out as a template. And if you just follow the playbook, and it's not a guarantee you'll pass the interview because you still have to use your brain and come up with insightful things and demonstrate creativity. Like it's still a hard interview to pass, but like your chances of passing the interview are going to be zero if you can't cover all the signals in the time that you have. So my framework is designed to literally tell people how much time to spend at every section and what to cover in every section, and put yourself in the shoes of the interviewer. And that stuff does not need to be one-on-one. I can teach that to 10, 15. I guess I'll find out what the ceiling is, but I'm currently thinking probably limiting the initial cohort at 10, 15 people. If it works, maybe I'll grow it. And if not, I'll keep running that size.
We've spoken to people like Alex Rachevsky, who does this full time. This is one of
I talked to Alex yesterday. Oh. Yeah.
He's awesome. So why not full time?
I just don't want to do it full time. Like I kind of like doing product work too. You know, it's like I like advising. I like the context switching between giving someone advice and actually doing the job myself. Like we've covered, I don't like the context switching of having two different jobs I have to do myself as a PM, but I do like the context switching between like genuinely helping someone be better at what they do without having to do the work myself for them and having the actual responsibility of being an interim PM. Like I want to always have an interim kind of engagement going because I think that's really enjoyable. It's also like good for paying the bills because there are more hours. But my fear is that I become rusty as a PM if I stop doing PM work. So I want to stay fresh. I want to have a reason to continue using that PM muscle.
So Ben, when I reconnect with you in a year, you're still going to be doing many different things. Honestly, talking to you now, I can't imagine you doing one thing.
I don't know. I think there's something really exciting about, you know, like for you, for example, like you can relate, like you really like this podcast, and it would be sad for me as someone who's gotten to like watch you kind of like grow as a podcaster recently. If you get a full-time job and you abandon the podcast, there's something like the emotion I feel thinking about that is kind of like, oh, that's a shame, right? Like there's something kind of sad about that idea. And I'm not judging it, you know, because like I know if you get a full-time job, like they're demanding as hell, right? Like you have to put yourself into a full-time job. Otherwise you feel like you're not delivering on what you need to deliver. You're not doing your best. So I understand why people, when they take a full-time job, stop doing other stuff. I know a couple other people that were like, I can't post on LinkedIn anymore because I have a full-time job. I can't put content out anymore because I have a full-time job. I have to be really careful what I say publicly because people could think it's representing the company, right? Like there's all this stuff that like you have to think about that's kind of getting in the way of authentic expression. And so for me, whether I will still be doing exactly what I'm doing a year from now, no idea. Would I like to continue to have a portfolio of things that I spend my time on that give me energy so that I can also be really present with my wife and my daughter and stuff? Yes. Like I like that flexibility.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. It made me a little bit emotional. Itamar Gilad, in his example of MVPs, where he talks about the dashboard versus the chatbot, but he says, which feature should you move forward with? The feature where when you're testing it, if it goes away, the users are upset. They'll miss it. So thank you. That was beautiful. I have a set of lightning round questions, and if it takes a bit longer to answer, I'd rather get the meat. So could go as long as thunder.
Let's do it.
Okay, so number one, you touched on this, Alex. A lot of the fractional work, I don't know that there's formal research around it, but we're all parents. I have 2 kids. Alex has, I think, 3, a 4th on the way. You have a kid. And what I found is, and I know there's all of this, women have it hard. And I've worked for amazing female bosses and amazing male bosses and horrible female bosses and horrible male bosses. But I think there's definitely a clear differentiation between someone who has kids and who understands just how you can't breathe if your childcare is canceled for the day and you don't have plans. Just everything. You can't get anything done if your kid is around, even for half an hour, they will sit quietly. You don't know how much of that hostage taking situation and parental decision making should be tied into what kind of work you're going to be doing. Because on the flip side is also a full-time job is the benefits, is the stability that you'll be able to put money away for your kids and put them through school, blah, blah, blah.
Such a good question. I was laughing because before I had my daughter, I thought the hardest part was going to be the sleep. And we got really lucky with sleep. She's been sleeping through the night since like 3 months. She's almost a year and a half now. The part that I completely underestimated and maybe didn't even consider because no one talked to me about it was the degree to which unexpected childcare duties will just blow up your day. And like my daughter's been sent home from daycare more times than I can count because she had like a higher fever than they like. And we take her to the doctor and the doctor's like, she's got no fever. And I'm like, okay.
Where do you think she got the fever?
Yeah, so she's got a quote unquote fever. She can't go back to daycare for 24 hours. She came home at 1 p.m., which means she can't go to daycare the next day. So now we have 2 full work days blown up because we have to do childcare. And my wife and I both work from home. And it's unpredictable. You can't do anything with, like, one person has to take the kid or you both have to share the kid responsibilities. And I'm sure you're nodding. You get it. So for me, for the first year of my daughter's life, I had a full-time job. And when these blow-ups happened, it felt really bad. Like it felt like I was going to drop the balls. I felt like I was letting my team down. I felt like, it was really, really, really hard. Now that I am doing a lot of stuff that is, a little bit like I have a portfolio of things that happens. If my daughter needs to stay home from school for any reason, I just tell people, hey, I'm not going to be available today. And if that means I don't get paid for that day, that's fine. Like I just miss a day of pay and it's more transactional in that way. So it's like this, the deal. Like I just got to move our meeting. Like we'll do it. I don't feel like I'm like a bad person. I don't feel like I'm like doing something bad. So it's actually really, I think, alleviated some of the stress at home around childcare for me to be in this situation. And then the last thing I'll say on that, because you mentioned it, I'm super grateful to my wife who has a full-time job and she has a good benefits package at a late stage startup. And, our health insurance and stuff is tied to her job. So I have the luxury of not having to be the primary, breadwinner in the household or the primary person who's got the more stable job in that sense. Like we're pretty equal partners in life in general. And I think that this is a phase of life right now where I have a lot of respect and appreciation for her for, doing what she's doing. And I think if she left her job and we had to also have, pay for health insurance and stuff, maybe that causes me to reconsider what I'm doing with my time. And there's financial realities in life. And I talked to someone when I was starting this journey, like probably 4 or 5 months ago, who had 2 kids, lived in California. He was about to come up at the end of his COBRA coverage because he was impacted by one of the layoffs at the big tech companies. And he was about to start having to pay $3,000 a month for health insurance for his family if he didn't find a new company that would cover healthcare, right? And if you're going to do fractional, if you're going to assume, 40% tax rate and living in a place like New York, just to be safe when you pay your taxes, if you need to take home $3,000 to cover health insurance, that means you got to earn $5,000. So now you got to go, there's all this extra pressure. That's another $5,000 of earnings that you have to make just to cover your health insurance that that would have otherwise maybe gone to just like your savings or your checking or daily activities. So now maybe instead of being comfortable making, 10, 15K a month, now you have to make 20K a month to make it work. And maybe you can't, right? So I think those are kind of like the ways that the numbers could add up. And I'm very grateful for this moment right now because I can do what I can do.
And on behalf of humanity, I want to thank you for procreating and putting those Ben Erez genes into the next generation.
I don't know how to respond to that, but thank you for saying that.
Next question. So for someone considering fractional work, should they go on their own and try to work their network, or should they go through something like Continuum, or I saw Protify doing a similar thing where you sign up to a network that has clients and then you're like the product manager consultant essentially?
So my assessment is that the marketplaces are completely out of whack. There's way more supply than demand. So there's way more people that want to do fractional work than there are companies that are going to the marketplaces to find fractional employees. I would say the learning from Continuum, or one of the big learnings, was that a lot of the demand gets aggregated in networks. So people go through people they know. I get people referring me to people that they know, like mutual friends. I also get people reaching out to me from my LinkedIn post, or like the Lenny post that went live recently. I got a couple of founders reaching out to me after that wanting to chat. So I would say generally, if people want to build up a pipeline of quote unquote leads that they could potentially work with as fractional people, the two biggest bets that I see are, one, to like really warm up your network. Go back to all the people who you've enjoyed working with, who are plugged in, who ideally know other of the type of people you want to work with. So for me, it's like early stage founders is like my audience. So like venture capitalists, founders, executives, all those people I've been warming up and just letting them know kind of like what I'm up to. And then LinkedIn posts are a really good way to LinkedIn or other kind of social media is a really good way to stay top of mind. You're kind of marketing yourself. There's an adage that we used to talk about a lot at Continuum, which is like, there's a marketing adage, which is people don't remember your product or your brand until they see it 14 times. And so if you're a person who has been really quiet, maybe you're like the best at what you do, but you've just been like so freaking quiet about it for the last like 10 years or 15 years or however long you've been doing it. You've got a ton to offer. You know your shit inside and out, but no one knows who you are. So how are they supposed to find you, right? So I think you have to start putting yourself out there. So I'm doing the podcast, I'm doing the LinkedIn posts, I have my newsletter, I'm starting a course, right? Like I'm just kind of getting my name out there, the Lenny post, whatever it is. This podcast, right? It's all marketing, and doesn't mean I'm showing up inauthentically on this. If anything, it's better for me to be authentic here because I want the people if someone listens to this and they want to work with me, I'm like, man, this is a really qualified lead. Like this is probably gonna be a good fit. They know me. They know how I think about stuff. So I think putting yourself out there authentically is really uncomfortable for a lot of people, but I think it's the work that you have to do. And when I saw people try fractional work at Continuum and they couldn't make it last, it's because they really were not willing to kind of fully lean into the marketing motion that's required to kind of build a brand around yourself. Like I think of Elena Verna, right? Like you think of like a lot of really successful fractional people that are having newsletters now. A lot of them just took the time to build a brand around themselves. And I think just like you'd market a product, like if you believe in yourself and you want to bet in yourself, like why wouldn't you market yourself, right? Like that kind of seems like what you need to do.
Company CEO has two options. Option one, hire junior employees, but all full-time. Option two, experts, really expensive, know their shit, 15 years of experience, but part-time or fractional.
I would do one of each. So both. And I know it's kind of like a cop out to your question, but like I really do think that the magic can happen when you have like a very hungry, very ambitious, very hardworking, more junior person in the seat that's ready to like put in all the hours, and they don't have kids, like they've got like 50, 60 hours in them per week. They don't get tired. They don't get distracted. And then you can pair them with someone who can help them figure out how to like channel that energy and like where to channel it and how to get smarter. I think it's a really good win for everyone. But I think if the CEO had to pick one and they're an early stage company that just needs to grind, I'd probably say go with the junior person that's going to grind over the fractional person who's going to kind of like mostly give advice.
Expert. Ben Erez is an expert. You've built up your expertise. You've worked at quote unquote the right companies. You've done your marketing. You've done your years of experience. You have confidence. For someone listening to this and saying, well, duh, Ben is so awesome. He has all those pieces. I've just worked at the same or two companies for 4 years each. and I'm considering this. Like, how should people think about themselves if they're not as cool as you? And
Everyone's cooler than me, that's for sure. I mean, look, everyone's got a superpower, okay? Everyone's got something that they are really good at, okay? Figuring out what that thing is, that thing that's kind of at that intersection of like what you're really good at and what you enjoy doing and what other people value, like figuring out what those are. And for me, it's required a lot of like reflection on the past in times when I don't really care what other people value if I'm not interested in doing it. So for me, the kind of reflection is like, first, think back to the times in my career where I felt most excited, most engaged, like I'm contributing the most flow state, right? And try to like figure out if there's any commonalities, like what was going on? Like what was the scenario? What was the dynamic? Like why was that happening, right? And then figure out if I was like good at those things. Maybe sometimes I was excited about stuff that I actually wasn't that good at, and that's good to know in hindsight. Maybe it was fun, but I probably wasn't the right person to be leading that. But if there's something that was really fun and there's something that I think I was actually really good at objectively, like people gave me like good feedback, like the thing was successful, and then there's a kind of a little bit of a leap of faith that you got to make to that third thing, which is, will people value that, right? And so for me, the big question was like, will people value my experience as an advisor? I guess we'll find out, right? Will people value my experience as someone who's going to come in and like help them get shit in order for 3 months? I guess we'll find out. Will people want to join my Maven class and learn more about how to interview as a PM at Meta? I'm going to find out, right? Like there's always like that leap of faith that you got to take at some point to find out if the market values what you have. And there's risk there. There's ways to mitigate that risk. You know, for example, like with my coaching, my interview coaching, I did it for free for a lot of time. And guess what? People's time is really valuable. So if people want to spend time getting my advice on how to pass interviews, the question is not, is it valuable? The question is, will other people pay for it, or would those people have paid for it, right? So these little things you could test. With advising, I have a bunch of founder friends who want my advice on stuff. Have they paid me for it? No. But would other people who maybe don't know me pay me for it? Maybe. Let's find out, right? So I think that's kind of like the way I would tell people. It has nothing to do with being confident or cool or anything like that. I think it's just about just being authentic with yourself, like trying to figure out what you enjoy and what you're good at, and then figuring out how to get in front of people who might value those things and just sell it.
If you could meet with one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
It's a tough question. Probably whoever orchestrated the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza.
What would you ask?
How'd you do it?
Give me the plans. Taking this full circle, what's the one message someone listening to this conversation should walk away with?
I would say that life is too short to be spending your time and energy on stuff that doesn't make you excited. And while I understand that not everyone has the luxury or the privilege of spending their time doing stuff that energizes them, I think there's hundreds of thousands of people in tech that do have the ability to stop doing what they're doing and find stuff that's going to be more exciting and energizing to them. So if you have the ability to go from something that is a drag or something you don't look forward to on Sunday night because you're dreading Monday, and there's something inside that's like, I want to express myself in a different way, or I can contribute in a different way that would make me excited to show up for whatever that thing is on Monday morning, then I kind of think that you have an obligation to yourself to explore those things. Take chances, try. The safety of, one of the things we didn't get a chance to talk about is fractional work more safe than, full-time work? I think anyone that pretends to have an answer to that is going to be completely lying to you. I think that I know people that thought they were going to spend the rest of their life at Meta that just got the boot. It's probably hundreds of those people. Same at Google and a lot of other companies recently. And these people are having to completely reconfigure their whole life right now because they thought they were doing the safe thing. So I don't know if there's a single thing that is safe. And at the end of this thing, we're all dying anyway. So it's like, what is safety? I mean, it's like, is it just not getting fired? Is that really like the goal of life, is just to be in an environment where you're not going to get fired? I don't know. It feels like it's kind of aiming too low. So maybe there's a better goal. And maybe that better goal is to really look forward to the way you spend your time and feel really energized by it. And whether that's having a portfolio of things like I'm doing, or whether that's having one company that you really believe in and you're doing it because you're excited about it. That's a great reason to have a full-time job. Like, there's no right answer, but just, I would say life's too short to do stuff that you're not energized by.
Ben, I love talking to you. This conversation energized me, and I hope it energizes the people who listen to this as well. Thank you so, so much.
Thanks for having me, Esty.
If you've gotten this far, thank you for listening to another one of my episodes. Remember to follow The Esty Show on whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts. If you have any feedback, questions, or just want to share your own experiences, don't be shy. Hit me up on LinkedIn or email. That's esty.podcast@gmail.com. I'm all ears. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and never stop learning.